Name something that gets passed around.
A joint.
A joint.
Legalized marijuana is always a very difficult question.
The time is long overdue for us to remove the federal prohibition on marijuana.
From now on, I smoke weed exclusively with white people.
Well, I'll get higher next time.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
There's definitely cannabis in there, and it makes sure that I can sleep now.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Don't piss off your old dealer.
Marijuana is not the kind of thing that ought to be legalized.
I know you're not supposed to admit that you smoke pot, but I don't drink alcohol.
Let's get out of here. I have some really good weed back at the hotel.
I used to smoke marijuana.
I don't care if an adult wants to smoke marijuana. They shouldn't go to prison for it either.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Time for Toker Talk Radio. Glad to have you here. All sorts of things to talk about. We're going to get into the drug czar announcement. Looks like Tom, what's the guy's name? Just had it in the tip of my... Tom Marino. There we go. Tom Marino, the Republican congressman from Pennsylvania, expected to be the new drug czar. We'll unpack that and see if that's good, bad, or neutral. Also, I got more to say about the United Airlines incident. There's been some more statements from the United CEO and more discussion about this on the internet. So we'll get to that in one of the later segments. But right now, I wanted to talk about this photo that I got. Maybe you saw it. It's a screen capture from a video that was put out by the Lake County Sheriff's Office in Florida. I'll put that up on the screen right now. For those of you just listening, it shows the Lake County Sheriff in front of a podium, and to either side of him are two black-clad, body armor-wearing men in baklavas. You know, full face masks, like ski masks, right? So two on his left, two on his right, with their arms folded in their full, battle gear. And I'm looking at the picture, and if you didn't know any better, this looks like one of those ISIS beheading videos where they have the main mullah in the middle, and then they got the guys in the masks, in the executioner masks to either side. That's what this looks like. And this is a video on, combating heroin and drug issue in Florida, and Lake County won't stand for this stuff. But that's the picture they put out. That's the image they put out for their drug law enforcement. Looks like they're ready to behead somebody. We will behead cannabis plants. We have declared a patwa. It's a patwa on cannabis. It's a gun jihad. That's what it is, a gun jihad. Jeez, man. It's just crazy. The militarization of our police forces, the militarization of this drug war, that they think this is cool. They think this is okay, and that they view people who are drug consumers, drug sellers, they view us as a military enemy. They frame themselves in military gear, and they conduct military-style raids against us. Is it any wonder that people in many neighborhoods across this country see the police as an occupying force? Chris Hayes from MSNBC has a book out right now called A Colony in a Nation. I think that's the name of it. And it kind of sums up the idea that for many people, for many groups, minorities, cannabis consumers, and others, we feel like a colony. We feel like we are an occupied colony inside of a greater nation. And it's just maddening to be in this situation, because as a cannabis consumer, most of us are peaceful, law-abiding, good folks that just want to get along and have our businesses and go to work and, raise our kids and just live life like anybody else. And we want an orderly society. We want safety. We want security, just like anybody else. But when you're a cannabis consumer and you're facing cops that look like that, cops that look like they're ready to behead you, and you know that that's their attitude, you don't want to call those kind of cops. somebody's breaking into something across the road, you don't want to call the cops. I don't want to deal with those guys. I don't want to bring those guys into my neighborhood. How many people don't call cops when they hear a domestic disturbance or see something odd going on in their neighborhood for the fear that those cops are then going to go after them? I've covered numerous stories where somebody calls in like a domestic violence complaint or something like that, or a burglary or whatever, and the cops get there, and when they see evidence that there's weed, a pipe, an ashtray, a stem, a stick, whatever, they see evidence of weed, they begin prosecuting the weed case. Oh, let the trail go cold on the theft, on the burglar. Let the trail go cold on the domestic abuser. Don't worry about that. Let's get this menace of weed out of this house. So the next person being abused by their domestic partner, who happens to be a weed smoker, maybe they don't call. Marijuana prohibition leads to the breakdown of our society, the breakdown of our order, because of this very reason, because we're afraid to interface with the police.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
Listen up, mistress, and you too, sisters. Let's talk about something that's a real brain twister. Drugs, drugs, drugs. We got good, we got bad. Drugs, drugs, drugs. Ask your mama, ask your dad. Drink a little water. Take the doctor's pill. Drugs can make you better when you're feeling ill. Drugs, drugs, drugs. We got good, we got bad. Drugs, drugs, drugs. Ask your mama, ask your dad. There's lots of other drugs that sure have a flaw. Watch it now, man. It's trouble with the law. Drugs, drugs, drugs. We got this, we got that. Drugs, drugs, drugs. Ask your mama, ask your dad. Drugs, drugs, drugs. We got this, we got that. Drugs, drugs, drugs. Ask your mama, ask your...
This has been the Russ Belville Show's anti-drug public service announcement of the day, exclusively on RadicalRuss.com.
You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, we've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs, we've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
In my view, the time is long overdue for us to remove the federal prohibition on marijuana.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact NORML at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
Pod 2.0. It's not your father's Woodstock weed. This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. 9:30 after the hour. And in this segment, I want to talk about the new drug czar wannabe. The report's coming out of CBS News that Tom Marino, a Pennsylvania Republican congressman, is likely to become the next head of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, a.k.a. the drug czar. Now, there is some some room for us to be a little relieved, maybe. Because this isn't drug czar Chris Christie. And it's not anybody else who's typically known as a virulent anti-pot person. We don't have much on Tom Marino when it comes to marijuana. We don't really know what his marijuana position is all about. What we do know is that Tom Marino is all over the opiate epidemic. He's got his fingerprints all over policy when it comes to opiates in this country. In 2016, we had over 50,000 people die from opiate abuse, from overdose, etc. And Tom Marino was part of a new law that was an effort to crack down on the opiate epidemic. He has been working on this issue for a few years. And according to the Washington Post, which did an expose on the epidemic of opiate abuse back in October, they found some interesting things about Tom Marino's involvement in this. Now, to set the stage, let's understand what's going on when we talk about this opiate abuse epidemic. Opiates are controlled substances, Schedule 2 or Schedule 3. OxyContin is the OxyContin, and fentanyl are in that Schedule 2, and things like Vicodin and Dilaudid and others, or Percocets, are in Schedule 3. I might be wrong on one or two of those, but they're either Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, highly restricted drugs under the Controlled Substances Act. So when you're a company like Purdue Pharmaceuticals and you want to make some OxyContin, you can't just crank up the factory and churn out as much OxyContin as you want. There's an office at the DEA called the Office of Diversion Control, and they control the quotas that are allowed. The companies have quotas. They're only allowed to manufacture so much of these drugs. But since the medical marijuana era, since 1996, there have been 20-fold increases in some cases in how much of those drugs are allowed to be manufactured. Numbers like 16 tons going up to 150 tons, for example. Allowed by the DEA. So when you want to point a finger at what's going on with this opiate overdose epidemic, point it at the DEA for allowing a massive increase for the pharmaceutical companies in their quotas for opiate manufacturing, because these pharmaceutical companies have come up with these great new formulations and they want to make sure they get sold. We even get companies like Insys Therapeutics that make a fentanyl spray, and their CEO and a few of their people getting busted for kickbacks and bribes to doctors to get them to prescribe this, not just for the cancer pain that it's recommended for, that it's approved for, but off-label uses that it's not approved for. These pharmaceutical companies have been pushing these opiate drugs like crazy, and they wonder why there's an epidemic. So about a decade ago, the DEA started focusing on this. Around 2007, they start focusing on this. And they start coming up with these procedures and ideas on how they might target the big companies that are distributing millions of these highly addictive pills. But of course, the pharmaceutical industry didn't take that lying down. They got their lobbyists, they got their money, they started fighting back. Former DEA and Justice Department officials were hired by the drug companies through that revolving door, and they began lobbying for a softer approach on the pharmaceutical companies. By early 2012, the Deputy Attorney General, summoned by the DEA's diversion chief against two major drug companies, was chastised for going after the industry. This is Joseph T. Ranazizi, who ran the Office of Diversion Control for a decade before he was removed from his position in 2015. The DEA chastised, oh, don't be going after those pharmaceutical companies. He still did anyway. But as he kept doing that, the DEA officials at the headquarters began delaying and blocking enforcement actions, and the number of cases plummeted. Even a judge, Chief Administrative Law Judge John J. Mulrooney II, wrote in a quarterly report, quote, "There can be little doubt that the level of administrative diversion enforcement remains stunningly low for a national program," end quote. How low? All right, here's a comparison. In 2011, the civil cases against distributors, manufacturers, pharmacies, and doctors that were overprescribing or diverting opiates got as high as 131. Wait, I know. Hold on to your hat. 131 nationwide. When we've got tens of thousands of people dying from opiates, there were 131 cases nationwide in 2011. That dropped to 40 in 2014. Just 40 cases in 2014. And according to the Justice Department, the immediate suspension orders, which is the DEA saying cease and desist, you got to stop right now. The immediate suspension orders dropped from 65 in 2011 to 9 in 2014. Just 9 enforcement actions while people are dying. According to Frank Junker, a DEA supervisor in Cincinnati, he said, quote, "Things came to a grinding halt. I talked to my fellow supervisors and we were all frustrated. It was ridiculous. I don't know how many lives could have been saved if the process was done quicker," end quote. So where does this Representative Marino come in? Well, according to reports, he's really against this opiate epidemic. In fact, there's a picture he sent out on Instagram where he was with Speaker Ryan signing a bill that would crack down on the opiate epidemic. But the measure that he proposed, led by Marino of Pennsylvania and Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, two Republicans, undercuts the DEA's ability to hold the big pharmaceutical companies accountable. 4 major players lobbied heavily in favor of the legislation: McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, and the Distributors Association. The Healthcare Distribution Alliance spent $13 million lobbying the House and Senate to get this passed. Now, Ranazizi, the guy who was running Office of Diversion Control, complained about this bill. He said, quote, "This bill passes the way it's written, and we won't be able to get immediate suspension orders. We won't be able to stop the hemorrhaging of these drugs out of these bad pharmacies and these bad corporations. What you're doing is filing a bill that will protect defendants in our cases," end quote. According to Washington Post, his remarks enraged Marino, the chairman of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Regulatory Reform. In September of 2014, in a congressional hearing, Marino tore into then DEA Administrator Michelle Leonhardt, his boss, Ranazizi's boss, saying, quote, "It is my understanding that Joe Ranazizi, a senior DEA official, has publicly accused we sponsors of the bill of, quote, supporting criminals, unquote. This offends me immensely. You should take a serious look at your regulatory culture and seek collaboration with legitimate companies that want to do the right thing," end quote. 7 days later, Marino and Blackburn, who represent districts and states that have been hit hard by the opioid epidemic, demanded that the Justice Department's Inspector General investigate Ranazizi's remark. They said he had tried to intimidate members of Congress. An investigation was launched, and Ranazizi was replaced in August 2015 and retired last October. Matthew Murphy, a DEA official who worked with Ranazizi, said that led to his undoing, quote, he wasn't going to change his opinion because of some heat, end quote. Marino said the conflict boils down to one person, Ranazizi. Quote, this is Marino saying, "We had a situation where it was just out of control because of Ranazizi. His only mission was to get big fines. He didn't want to do anything but put another notch in his belt," end quote. Now, the legislation passed last year, and the standard now for the diversion office to obtain an immediate suspension order has been raised from an imminent threat to the public to an immediate threat to the public. Imminent upgraded to immediate. Now that raises the bar to a nearly impossible burden to meet, according to DEA supervisors and other critics. They say the new law gives the industry something it has desperately sought: protection from having its drugs locked up with little notice. 4 months after Ranazizi left, representatives from drug distributors and pharmacy chains got what they wanted.
Man, I'm not going to any more of these bullshit Puno parties.
So there you go, folks. That's your new drug czar. A guy who helped the pharmaceutical industry avoid being held accountable for the opiate epidemic. I wonder who he's going to hold accountable for the opiate epidemic. I wonder if he's going to have any marijuana gateways to tell us about. Happy 420, everyone. Smoke them if you got them.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Okay, maybe you're high too. Warning. Hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they pay me to say that.
Is this right? Just try not to drool quite so much on the end of it.
A public service message from the Russ Belville Show. Warning, hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they pay me to say that. This is Dan Michaels from danmichaelsaudio.com, and you're listening to Radical Russ on cannabisradio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. 21 after the hour, and following up on this United Airlines situation, it's gotten even worse. So, as you remember from yesterday, a man in Chicago was booted off of a United Airlines plane. What had happened was that the people had already boarded the plane, and then a United crew of 4 United employees needed to get on that plane, like a pilot and a co-pilot and flight attendants or whatever, needed to get on that plane so they'd be in Louisville the next day for a flight out of Louisville. Now, the problem is they'd already seated everyone on the plane, okay? And then they said, well, this plane's not leaving until we get 4 people to give up their seats because we got these United employees that need to fly somewhere. So this, some of the reports on this has been that the flight was overbooked. No, flight wasn't even overbooked. This wasn't a case of 2 passengers paying for the same seat, which I ran it on yesterday, and I still don't understand why that's legal. I don't understand how someone's allowed to sell the same product twice and tell the second purchaser tough shit when they show up for it. Because if you do that for anything else, you put a TV on Craigslist and you sell it to 2 people, they're not going to be too happy with that second. That's fraud, I understand, in any other circumstance. So there's been some developments. Number one, it wasn't an overbooked situation. It was a situation where United wanted to kick out paying passengers who were already seated on the plane in favor of their own employees. Okay, so that's the first problem. Now, people have been investigating this and say, well, the airlines have the right to not let you board the plane. It's in the fine print right there. If they're overbooked, they have a situation, they can have you not board the plane. Right. This has actually happened to me. I've had the requests, when I'm sitting at the gate and they say, we're overbooked. Do we have any volunteers? And sometimes I have the time and I take them up on that. But that's before they've boarded. There's nothing in that fine print that says we can kick you off the plane after you've already boarded in favor of some other passengers. So that was the first thing, is this outrage over being kicked off the plane. And of course, they call the cops. The cops show up. They physically pull the guy out of his seat. And as they do so, The guy hits his head. The guy's head is hit against an armrest and knocks him out, knocks him limp. He's bloody. They're dragging him down the aisle. People are screaming. So what has happened lately is the PR crisis after it. Now, this is hilarious because once the video surfaced, people started, taking pictures of this on their cell phone and video on their cell phone. It surfaced and it went viral. People started attaching it to some old United tweets of United Journey, hashtag United Journey. Tell us how United helps your journey. And people like attaching the attaching the video. Had one guy who did a map of a United plane, a seat map, and said business class, first class, and Fight Club, right? So a PR disaster was only compounded when United tried to respond to it. It was amazing. Their first response from the United company was that Flight 3411 was overbooked and police were called after a man refused to leave the aircraft voluntarily. As I pointed out, the flight wasn't overbooked. The flight was properly booked, but they just wanted to steal 4 seats for their own employees and refused to leave the aircraft voluntarily. Merriam-Webster Dictionary called them out on that. They noted that volunteer, quote, does something without being forced to do it, end quote. You're not volunteering when people are pulling you off the damn plane. So then their chief executive officer got on and tweeted out an apology of sorts. It read, "This is an upsetting event to all of us here at United. I apologize for having to reaccommodate these customers. Our team is moving with a sense of urgency to work with the authorities and conduct our own detailed review of what happened. We are also reaching out to this passenger to talk directly to him and further address and resolve this situation." And the internet went nuts. Reaccommodate? That's what you call dragging a man and assaulting a man? You call that reaccommodating? So he tried another one. And he said, "I deeply regret this situation arose, but I want to commend you for continuing to go above and beyond to ensure we fly right." This situation arose. This is where I get so pissed off in this. And not just with this United case, but like everybody who ever gets busted doing anything these days is this reflexive use of passive voice. This situation arose. Like we were all just sitting around minding our own business, and through absolutely nobody's fault whatsoever, a situation arose. No, you chose to call cops to assault a man who had paid for a seat on your plane. Active voice. You did something, United. So finally, the third letter from the United CEO, who, by the way, a year ago was given an award for being such an outstanding public relations person. Yeah, this third attempt, he says, quote, "The truly horrific event that occurred on this flight has elicited many responses from all of us. Outrage, anger, disappointment. I share all of those sentiments and one above all, my deepest apologies for what happened. Like you, I continue to be disturbed by what happened on this flight, and I deeply apologize to the customer forcibly removed and to all the customers aboard. No one should ever be mistreated this way." And again, apology to the customer forcibly removed by you. If this had said, "I deeply apologize to the customer we had forcibly removed," then you're getting somewhere. But again, it's passive voice. A customer was forcibly removed. We were just sitting around, and what do you know? All of a sudden. So he goes on to say, "I want you to know we take full responsibility and will work to make it right. Here's how you can make it right, United. Give this guy a lifetime free airline ticket on United. For the rest of his life, he gets to fly anywhere he wants to go. First class if you got it." That might suffice, don't you think? He continues to say, quote, "It's never too late to do the right thing. I have committed to our customers and our employees that we are going to fix what's broken so this never happens again. This will include a thorough review of our crew movement, our policies for incentivizing volunteers in these situations, how we handle oversold situations, and examination of how we partner with airport authorities and local law enforcement. We will communicate the results of our review by April 30th. Thorough review, of how we handle oversold situations. I have an idea. How about not having oversold situations? Oversold situations. As, again, passive voice. We're just sitting around minding our own business when, oh my gosh, our flight was oversold. How did that happen? It happened because you oversold it, you assholes. You chose to sell the same product fraudulently twice. You committed fraud by promising one product to two customers. And I'll tell you what's really, really got me pissed off about this. Oh boy. When you force me to not just agree with, but applaud New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, you know you done fucked up. Chris Christie today, this was reported by CNN. I was so stunned I had to pause the TV and take a snapshot of it. Because it may be the only time in my life I will ever applaud Chris Christie. But Chris Christie said, quote, "This conduct is abusive and outrageous. The ridiculous statements, now in their third version, of the CEO of United Airlines displays their callousness toward the traveling public with the permission of the federal government." Oh my God, I agree with Chris Christie. Governor Christie is now calling on President Trump to suspend, by executive order, to suspend the federal regulation that allows the airlines to overbook their flights. I was glad to hear this because I didn't realize, I mean, I guess it's logical now that I think about it, because everybody else who tries to sell the same product twice is committing fraud. So of course there's a special regulation that allows them to commit fraud. Of course there is. Of course, at some point, they lobbied and got the Congress to give them the special right to sell 310 seats on a 300-seat airplane. Or whatever the number is. Of course, there's a regulation that allows that. I got to say, if President Trump were to sign an executive order that suspended that regulation, that forced the airlines to have to only sell a seat once, I don't know. It might be like the movie Scanners. Do you ever see the movie Scanners when the guy's head explodes from the psychic waves, right? You may see my head explode if that happens, because I would actually have to praise. Oh, sorry, I threw up in my mouth a little. I would actually have to praise an act by President Trump. That would, for me, he may not make America great again, but if he can make flying halfway decent again, there'd at least be something I could praise him for. Oh my God. It is. Governor Christie's right. And God, I hate saying that, but he's right. They don't give a shit about the customer because they don't have to give a shit about the customer. We let them get away with this. We let them overbook us. And this argument about the overbooking might have been convincing in 2008. 2008, there was quite a loss in the industry, in the airline industry. You know, we had the big economic collapse thanks to W. And in 2008, the airline industry lost about $20 billion. So yeah, you could understand, oh geez, better let these guys sell a seat twice. But since 2010, the airline industry has made billions in profit. 2015, their profits were over $20 billion. And that's in the North American commercial airline market, and it's a far greater profit than any airlines make in any other regions. European, Asian, Australian, African, South American airlines don't operate with that much profit. They have much tighter margins. But the airlines in North America, well, we'll just cram the seats 2 inches closer and make them an inch thinner, and we'll charge you to have a seat, and we'll charge you if you bring on a carry-on, and we'll charge you a greater price if you book the same day, and God forbid you want to change the flight. You can't change the flight. We'll charge you a fee for that, etc., etc. Got to take off your shoes, got to take off your jacket, got to let a TSA official grope you. They don't give a shit because they don't have to. It reminds me of that was a commercial on Saturday Night Live back in the day. AT&T, we don't care. We don't have to. It's exactly what's going on. United Airlines itself made $2.3 billion in profit last year. $2.3 billion. But they couldn't cough up the extra money to get their flight crew from Chicago to Louisville when one of their flights was full. Hire them a private jet if you have to. You don't kick off people that are already on the plane, that have already paid their money, who already have travel plans and have itineraries that depend on them being at a certain place at a certain time. Couldn't cough up any of that $2.3 billion in profit over that. Now, this CEO, by the way, this CEO is a new CEO, because last year, the CEO and a few people in United got busted. Yeah, and this goes back to Governor Chris Christie. It has to do with a guy, and I forget the guy's name, and how he was involved with Christie. He was like a administrative guy or something. I can't remember the exact detail about this. Commissioner or something. And there was this flight that went from, was it Newark to Charleston, South Carolina? Something like that. There was a flight that was a direct route flight that went from New Jersey to South Carolina, and United canceled this flight because it was a money loser. It was just, nobody was taking the flight, and they were just losing money on it, so they canceled the route. But then this guy, when he got his position, he's originally from like South Carolina or something, and that was the best flight for him to go back and forth from his work in New Jersey back to his home in South Carolina. So he improperly lobbied and got United to restore the route through bribes, through, I don't know if it was bribes, but they were just basically improperly motivating United to restore that route. In fact, it was nicknamed the Commissioner's Route. And United was willing to lose money so that this commissioner could have a flight back and forth from like 2011 to 2014, I think it was. And, of course, this commissioner had something to do with the travel industry as well, so United wanted him on their good side, and they were willing to lose money on it. The doctor from Louisville, not so much. They could care less if he's on their right side, because, of course, he doesn't affect their industry or their bottom line, does he? Like I said yesterday, folks, we can complain about this, but there was a great article I read today that said, you're not mad at United, you're mad at America. And it goes back to an old saying, you know, you're not mad about Monday, you're mad about capitalism. It's an old socialist saying. But it's kind of rings true in this case. We're not mad at United necessarily, because they're just a corporation, and corporations are sociopaths. And their job is to maximize profit for shareholders to any legal extent possible. As long as we allow them, as long as we allow the law to allow them to overbook and do this to passengers, they will. It's up to us to change the law.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com. Coming on Monday, May 1st, 2017, a new daily podcast dedicated to the expanding world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja, featuring leaders and experts from the worlds of activism, business, research, and entertainment. It's the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, premiering May 1st on mjagenda.com. Learn more at mjagenda.com. You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
All right. Well, maybe you're high, too. Warning. Hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they pay me to say that.
I smelled some marijuana smoke in Vietnam.
A public service message from the Russ Belville Show.
Most of us pirates, we go on vacation to North Dakota, you know, because they've got a town called Argosville. Arr. What are you smoking there, boy?
This is Dan Michaels from danmichaelsaudio.com, and you're listening to Radical Russ on cannabisradio.com.
Welcome back, everyone. 41 after the hour. One more quick thing on the United Airlines incident. One of my folks in the live chat room brought up this great little commercial parody from the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and I thought it was funny. So we're going to share that with you here in just a second, and also, well, you know what? Let's just get to the video. This is from the Jimmy Kimmel Show.
We're United Airlines. You do what we say when we say, and there won't be a problem. Capiche? If we say you fly, you fly. If not, tough. Look at what you did. Give us a problem, and we'll drag your ass off the plane. And if you resist, we'll beat you so badly, you'll be using your own face as a flotation device. United Airlines. You.
Very, very well done, Jimmy Kimmel. Thank you so much for that one. That was perfect. Yeah, it's just insane what they're allowed to get away with, and we can't stand for this anymore. It's just ridiculous. All right, let's go to the marijuana news. We were talking about the new drug czar. Tom Marino is the guy's name. Looks like he's going to be appointed as Trump's new drug czar. There are a lot of dates that we're looking at right now as far as whether or not we're going to see any sort of crackdown when it comes to marijuana. We've got the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, and I think it's this week. No, let me look. Maybe this week or next week where that comes up in Congress because it expires. And we'll see whether or not that can be reintroduced and whether or not it passes. Of course, Rohrabacher, what will be now called Rohrabacher-Blumenauer, is going to prevent the Department of Justice from spending any taxpayer money on attacking the operators in states that have legalized medical use of marijuana so long as they're obeying state law. Now, there's a case right now, a court case. I think it's a Montana court case that will set some of the standards for this amendment, because one of the things it doesn't specify is who decides. You know, it says the Department of Justice can't spend any money if these people are obeying state law, but who decides whether or not they're obeying state law? Is that the state itself, or is that the federal government? Because if it's the state itself, that would require then that the state undergoes some sort of prosecution of these entities before the federal government gets involved. If it's just the federal government's decision, on the other hand, that could lead to far more prosecutions, because what they think is a violation of state law might not be what the state itself thinks is a violation of state law. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But it won't mean anything if it doesn't get passed again. And it might not get passed again if the Speaker of the House doesn't allow it to come up for a vote. So we have to wonder whether Paul Ryan is going to allow that to come to the floor, or whether the committee heads in the committees that'll see this are going to allow it to come to a vote. We shall see. We've got some news on the trial of Richard Kirk. You may recall the Richard Kirk issue was all about the murder of his wife, and it garnered national attention because he supposedly had eaten some edibles, and that's what led him into a psychosis that made him kill his wife. So there is a resolution on the case now. Pulling this from AOL News, Richard Kirk, who pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in February, was sentenced to 30 years in prison, according to KDVR. In September, Kirk pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, citing marijuana intoxication, to a first-degree murder charge in the slaying of his wife, Christine. Since he ended up taking the plea deal, parental rights of the couple's 3 children will be granted to Christine Kirk's parents. Mr. Kirk has accepted responsibility for the murder of his wife, said Denver District Attorney Beth McCann. And the range of sentence possibilities will allow the judge and the public to hear any facts in mitigation and aggravation of the situation, end quote. This was, of course, a terrible case that was even more horrific because of the 911 call that was played, where his wife, shortly before she was slain, mentioned that her husband had marijuana and that he was going to get a gun. When they found him, they found a partially eaten pot candy and an untouched joint in the house. And he says that was what caused his delirium and psychotic-like symptoms. Now, this is good news for those of us who've been following the issue. We want to make sure this man is held responsible for his actions and that marijuana wasn't the culprit here. The man's a murderer. Marijuana doesn't make you a murderer, but some murderers do smoke marijuana. But now we've got an additional problem, and that is the family filing a wrongful death lawsuit against the store and the manufacturer that sold the edible to Richard Kirk. The lawsuit claims nutritional elements and manufacturer Gaia's Garden failed to put warning labels, instructions, or recommendations on the edible. So here's the civil case they're going to try to use to hold marijuana to blame for this guy killing his wife. I feel terrible for the family. I feel awful that those kids are going to have to be raised without both parents, with dad in prison for life, and, well, for the rest of his life, mostly. Although with parole, he might get out in 15, 20 years. I feel terrible for that. It's an awful thing. But I can't support this suit by the family against the edible manufacturer and the store. This is a case of them just looking for some deep pockets. They're just looking for some money. They're looking for somebody to give them a payday over this terrible, terrible tragedy. And I'm sorry that Richard Kirk isn't some sort of millionaire whose assets you could seize in this case to maybe fund the kids' college or whatever. But trying to hold the manufacturer of the edible and the seller of the edible responsible, again, is just as bad as Richard Kirk's defense team himself trying to hold the marijuana edible responsible. It's just as egregious. It's not the marijuana's fault. And it's going to be kind of politically difficult as this case goes to trial, because the manufacturer, the edible manufacturer and the store are going to have to call expert witnesses to come up and testify that marijuana doesn't cause the kind of psychotic break that would be necessary for these manufacturers to be held responsible. And that makes me worry about our side being perceived as being disempathetic to the issue when we're not. It's very frustrating, this case. And as it goes on, I just lament the fact that we're seeing this sort of scapegoating. It's just so unnecessary. The man's been convicted in criminal court. The man's being held responsible. He's going to do 30 years. So why do we need to punish the manufacturer or the store that did nothing wrong? It's just sad. All right, let me move on to another story. Forbes has a story up. $1 billion in marijuana taxes is addictive to state governors. And it points out the New Frontier Data report that states with legalized marijuana are on track to generate approximately $655 million in state taxes on retail sales in 2017. The $559 million of that is coming just from the cannabis taxes. $559 million more taxes than those states will be getting from alcohol taxes. So they point out that the tax revenues in the states with legalized marijuana are going to approach $1.8 billion. And that if the Trump administration cracks down on marijuana and forces, like in Colorado, them to switch all to medical where it's taxed a lot less, that money is not going to be easily replaced in those state budgets, especially as the Trump administration is already slashing grant programs and aid to the states. So his very actions, Trump's very actions of cutting the budget on everything but defense, only makes these state governors want those marijuana taxes more, makes them more willing to defend their state regulation. I worry about this because the prospect of the tax revenues dropping with respect to a Trump administration crackdown is the same sort of worry we're going to have in a few years anyway, with respect to the tax revenues dropping because the marijuana prices will drop so much. Now, in the case of the Trump thing, that means the marijuana industry and the states fighting against bad policies from Trump. But in the future, even if it's a Democratic president in 2020, even if it's a friendly administration in 2020, we're going to face a perverse incentive in these states that have legalized marijuana, basing their revenue forecasts off the taxes on a $300 ounce, when suddenly those ounces aren't selling for $300 anymore. When the extra people who would take up cannabis have flattened out, we've gotten to what will be the natural amount of consumption in marijuana. And when that happens, those states are going to want that tax revenue to keep rolling in. They can't very well politically be calling for more pot smoking more often. That's not politically palatable to them. So they're going to have to call for raising the taxes, raising the fees. That's what we're going to see in the future. As the price of marijuana declines, these states that are addicted to the tax revenue are going to call for greater taxes. When they call for greater taxes and get them, that will just further inflame the underground market to undercut those taxes. That will lead to our opponents saying, see, you can't tax and regulate marijuana. It just creates more of an underground market. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. I guess it's good that we're dealing with it now with the threat of Trump affecting the taxes before we have to deal with it as the price decline affecting the taxes. All right, stay tuned. We're going to take a short break. We'll wrap things up in our last segment here on Toker Talk Radio.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
The Russ Belville Show reminds you to never smoke and drive impaired. Hang out for a while and share.
This is Radical Russ Belville with a word about giving back. We're all very excited about the recent gains in marijuana reform, but while you may love the convenience of shopping for marijuana at a storefront, or are lucky enough to be profiting from the green rush, it's important that you remember that you wouldn't be where you are today without the sacrifices of cannabis freedom fighters who risked everything when 0 states had marijuana legalization. Join, support, and donate to your local and national drug reform organizations, including the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, at normal.org, Students for Sensible Drug Policy at ssdp.org, Marijuana Policy Project at mpp.org, Americans for Safe Access at safeaccessnow.org, Drug Policy Alliance at drugpolicy.org, and Law Enforcement Action Partnership at leap.cc. This has been a public service announcement from The Russ Belville Show.
And blue blasten Gergen, Pfaffen der Blasten, Schnurb Norben. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
All right, to wrap things up today, there's a story in the New York Times entitled Legal Marijuana Ends at Airport Security, Even If It's Rarely Stopped. Interesting look at, TSA regulations and flying with marijuana and all that, considering we have 29 medical marijuana states. They left out something, though. It's really interesting. They did a really detailed job on this report, but they didn't mention a thing about the kerfuffle the last week or two with TSA. There was an announcement, the TSA website had changed its designation about medical marijuana on flights. It was asked by somebody if it was legal, and they had given it the okay. TSA's website said, yeah, good to go. And we all went, well, cool, the first time we've heard this. And then once that spread virally, TSA updated it and said, clearly, no, absolutely not. You can't take medical marijuana on planes. Nothing about that in the New York Times piece. Really interesting. But they do list that out of 54 million passengers who went through Denver International Airport in 2015, TSA stopped 29 for possession of marijuana. 29 out of 54 million. And as long as they had less than an ounce, which is legal in Colorado, the local police just asked them to throw it away or take it back to their home in Denver. And all 29 people complied. There were no tickets issued. Now, it's different. You go down to Florida. Down in Jacksonville, Florida, they had some 2.8 million people that were screened. 11 of them were detained for possession of marijuana. All of them were arrested or given a notice to appear in court. And for those of you out there flying, thinking about taking weed with you, TSA security doesn't really look for weed, but if they find it, they'll turn it over to local police. TSA dogs don't sniff for marijuana or drugs. TSA dogs are looking for explosives. But if you're dealing with customs and border protection, they will screen for drugs with dogs, but only if you're coming in on an international flight. So really, folks, I don't travel with weed anymore just because everywhere I go, there's weed. So what's the point? But if I've traveled with weed in the past, I've even gotten the notes from TSA in my luggage that say they searched through my luggage when my luggage had weed in it. So yes, it's technically illegal, but chances are you're not going to get busted. That's all the time we got for today. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it,